there are two ways to proceed. There is our way, and there is Jesus' way. The trick is, we often think we are following Jesus' way when we are actually following our way. How do we know we are following Jesus' way? We follow Jesus' way when we pay attention to the respect that is given to people. You've probably noticed that for Jesus, everyone gets respect. The Samaritan woman, the blind man, the tax collector, and the poor widow who only had 2 cents to put in the offering plate. All of them deserve respect. Jesus warns us that certain people in the church seem to be most concerned that they be treated as better than everyone else. In Matthew 23, Jesus warns his disciples about following the way of an especially zealous group of religious leaders. Jesus says, "These religious leaders love to sit at the head table at church dinners, basking in the most prominent positions and getting called doctor and reverend." I have to say, I can never read that passage without feeling a little self-conscious. The topic of respect and humility is also in the center of our gospel reading from Mark. Jesus and his disciples were walking through Galilee. Finally, they came to the town of Capernaum. And when he was in the house, Jesus asked the disciples, "What were you arguing about on the way?" The disciples were silent, for on the way they had argued with one another who was the greatest. He sat down, called the 12, and said to them, "Whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all." That is Jesus' way. Those who are thought of as first must act like they are the last. Those who are given the positions of great power must be the servants of all. We try to follow Jesus' way in the church. For example, in our processions into and out of the church, the cross comes first. Do you know why that is? Being first is the position of greatest honor. The cross is the central symbol of our faith, and it deserves the place of greatest honor, so the cross comes first. In our procession, the place of lowest honor is at the end. Guess who's at the end? Me. This is why the priest or the bishop is the last person in the procession, because back in the olden days, the last person in the procession was usually the lowest servant or the lowest slave. The priest or the bishop takes the place of lowest respect. That is the last place, because we are trying to remind ourselves of Jesus' words. Whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all. People get confused about this. I just have to ask, just like going off topic here for a second or off script, has anybody ever looked at the procession and said, the priests, they get to go last because they're the most important? Just be honest, has anybody ever thought that? I have. That's our way. We get confused about these things even when we're trying to be intentional. Leaders in the church get confused about this. Sometimes I think I should do something to remind myself that being last in the procession is not supposed to be an honor. So this is my plan. Tell me what you think about it. I would remind myself by crawling down the aisle on my hands and knees behind the people holding the cross and the gospel book and the other ministers, the same way a slave or a servant might be forced to crawl behind the important members of the group. Should I try it? You probably don't want me to do that. Jean Avery at the 8 o'clock is just shaking her head. No, don't do it. It's a shocking image. And that is Jesus' point. I really think that's what Jesus was talking about. This is what Jesus means when he says, whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all. When we follow our way, the people in positions of greatest power get the most respect, and the people in positions of least power get the least respect. But, I'm not sure if you've noticed this, Jesus isn't following our way. Here and again in chapter 10, Jesus says those with the greatest power must act as servants, and those who have the least power must receive the greatest respect. That's why he takes a little child and puts it in front of them, because in his days, the children had the least respect. In order to understand this, it will help you to learn how to speak Dinka. Are you ready? Here's your first lesson. Dinka is the native language of our Sudanese members. When Lawal and Mawoot and Nibol and other Sudanese members talk to me, they often refer to me as Abuna. Do you know what Abuna means? This is the name for the priest in the Dinka language. And Abuna means servant. I often need to be reminded of this. Sometimes I think I should take a needle and thread and embroider the words Abuna onto my clergy collars. My clergy collars are made of white cloth. I think some red thread would stand out very well here. Sometimes I and other people who wear these collars act like our ideas are the most important. But we are actually the servants. For me, wearing one of these white collars actually means that my opinion is the least important opinion in the conversation. Once again, this is very different from the way people often think about the leaders in the church. This is exactly backwards from the way we normally think about things. For most people, the first will always be first, and the last will always be last. For most people, the leaders in the church seem to wear these collars to show that they have special positions. According to Jesus, the leaders in the church must act like they are servants of all. It is very difficult for us to understand this and very difficult for us to accept this. It was very difficult for Jesus' first disciples to understand. Jesus and his disciples passed through Galilee. Jesus was trying to keep things quiet. He was teaching his disciples about the path he would follow. Jesus said to them, "The Son of Man is to be betrayed into human hands, and 3 days, and they will kill him. And 3 days after being killed, he will rise again." But the disciples did not understand what Jesus was saying and were afraid to ask him. The disciples do not understand, and we do not really understand. Jesus' way is so completely different from our way. The disciples were probably expecting Jesus would become more and more popular and powerful. According to them, Jesus would have a triumphal entry into Jerusalem, which would end with him being acclaimed as Messiah and leader of all the people. Perhaps the disciples thought Jesus would be given an extra special chair to sit in the temple, and some special name. So they are completely confused when Jesus says, "I am going to be betrayed and put on trial and killed." They do not understand. According to Jesus, the way of salvation requires not victory, but suffering. According to Jesus, there is no resurrection without betrayal and pain. According to Jesus, there is no path to eternal life that does not somehow journey through death. According to Jesus, this makes no sense to the disciples, and it doesn't really make sense to us. So, we have plenty of crosses in our church, but we cover them with gold and jewels. When people see one of our crosses, the most common response is, "Wow, that is a really beautiful cross." do not often say, "Look at that cross. Now I understand the way of salvation is going to have to do something to do with suffering." Because that's what the cross means. We do not like suffering. We do everything in our power to avoid suffering. We do everything in our power to not see the way other people are suffering. We distract ourselves and try to ignore the reality of suffering. That is our way. Jesus' way is exactly backwards from our way. Jesus' way is all about suffering. Jesus' way is all about going to the places where people are suffering. It is about being with people who are suffering and trying to heal them. Jesus' way is about paying attention to suffering so we don't make stupid mistakes that cause other people to suffer. We might think we are following Jesus' way, but in almost all cases, we are following our way. Jesus' way is so much better. In our plan for the world, the first are always first, and the last are always last. In our plan for the world, those with the most power will always be first. They will have the most respect and honor. Look around at what is happening in the world. Imagine what they are talking about on the television shows right now. Our plan is not working. Our way is not working, especially when it comes to suffering. We would do so much better if we followed Jesus' way. This is our reality. There is going to be suffering. This is our reality. We need something that looks like salvation. We need something that acts like salvation in our lives. The cross means that it is only after we have endured suffering that we are in a position to experience the resurrection. The cross affirms that there is suffering in our lives, but our suffering is not meaningless. The cross means that God is with us in our suffering. We really want life to be easier. Life isn't going to be easier. We really want to win. Life isn't going to be so simple. We really get confused about Jesus' way. When Jesus says, "Whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all," we often seem to think Jesus is talking about those other people acting like servants. He is talking about you and me. So when powerful people put themselves ahead of everyone else, don't be confused and don't be discouraged. Powerful people have been doing that for a very long time. Make a clear decision for yourself about whose way you are following. Don't be afraid. Be strong as you take on the work of serving God's people.